First of all, I'd really like to hear from you, Catherine, about where we stand at the moment. You know, I gave a brief, in a nutshell, description of the levels of warming that we're seeing and the challenges that countries and businesses face in adapting to it. Where do we stand? How serious is the problem, and how much progress is being made in adapting to it?
So thanks for having us. Thanks for having this important discussion in a crucial moment. The challenge is significant, and we're more and more able to put numbers on just how challenging the economic costs are that we're facing in an OECD country context, but also in a global context. Whereas 20 years ago, I think we all confined the discussion to, this is a problem for the least capacitated countries in the world, and above all, the cost is a human cost. But we're understanding more and more by consecutive events in an OECD country context, from wildfires to floods to heat events, of just how costly they are even for the most developed economies. Let me give you an example. If we talk about recent wildfires, we started recording them 2 decades ago, when we then had consecutive wildfires such as the one in Australia. I don't know if anyone remembers, 2019-20, for example. It costed around 20 million euros in direct costs alone, and this is accounting for all the direct economic costs we can account for, not the indirect economic costs it may entail. And everybody said, this is unprecedented in terms of costs, we need to do something about it. Ever since then, every consecutive wildfire that everybody hears about has been more expensive than this event. The one in Portugal was at around 30 billion euros in terms of direct damage. The one in the US, doubly that amount. Flood events are known to be extremely costly to capital markets, to properties, and so forth. So there we're talking about a multiple of these damages. So now we have a very good account of these direct costs, but we're also doing quite an increasing set of models to actually understand the indirect and ripple-on effect on the economy. And in OECD countries alone, on average, these events knock off about 1% of GDP as we speak today. And of course, that is a number that hides the costs that this has to certain regions, to certain countries, and so forth. But I think on aggregate, a percentage is quite significant. And if we look forward, and in conservative estimates that we have now, let's say 2.5 degrees warming between now and 2050, we expect these costs to increase by 50 times. And that's pretty incredible as an economic challenge. And the impacts that we're seeing today are not just economic impacts. So if you think, again, let me take the example of a wildfire, which is closely related to heat. The surface that burns today is in fact the surface that will no longer yield the economic benefit it used to have in terms of ecosystem services, in terms of the water that is stored in that area. So it's actually quite a vicious cycle, because it means that water will fall less in that area. It will go somewhere else in the world, surely speaking, because it's a global good. But it will be forever gone there because the ecosystems don't have time to rehabilitate themselves. So the risk herd behind it is actually increasing again, naturally speaking. And obviously the social cost is above all of, when we're speaking of heat, for example, is tremendous. But not just heat, we're also still faring quite badly on all other climate risks, even in OECD countries. But if you take heat, for example, if you compare the US with Europe, to take one example, we see that fatality rates in the US are much, much lower than in Europe. So the excess mortality that we're observing in Europe is still tremendous. And that is not by a lack of knowledge of what we can do about it. That is not of a lack of education on how to behave. We are all sitting here drinking water. It's a lack of how we respond to it through public policy. Take Paris for an example. I live in Paris. It's extremely baking hot in Paris at the moment. Schools are closed, parents can't work, the public transport system is out of service, essentially. But the reason why this is the case is because there's rules in that city that do not allow apartment buildings, office buildings, public buildings to retrofit them with cooling systems. And we may not have enough time to think of other adaptation measures, but there are real regulatory constraints to actually reduce the costs that we're seeing today. So from our perspective, looking at how we can facilitate these investments that are there, that pay off, that make business sense, is a bit the role of the OECD to look at how we can unlock these investments to limit these damages moving forward.